So when I first launched my business, I had a lot of skeptics coming at me saying, "Oh, you're really psychic? Well, then why don't you take the James Randi $1,000,000 challenge and prove it?" And I'm like, "Who's James Randi?" And so I Googled him and I found out he was someone who used to be a professional magician who became a paranormal investigator, a hardcore atheist pursuing scientific evidence that the paranormal exists, psychic abilities exist, mediumship really exists. And he even put down $1,000,000 of his own money to anyone that he would give to anyone who could prove the existence of these abilities. And I guess several people came forward. No one was able to do it. And till this day, that was years ago, till this day, no one has won the $1,000,000 challenge. So he uses that as a platform in order to be an outspoken atheist. And so this was like years ago when I launched my business and, I found out who he was. And, of course, since then I've been approached by multiple people, James Randi $1,000,000 challenge, it'll come up here and there, whatever. I wanted to take it because my ego wanted to take over. The other side's like, yeah, we're not here to feed your ego, Christine. And the angelic realm dismissed it and said, no, we're not interested. And I said, why not? They said, because blind faith is rewarded. They're like, no, we're not giving you scientific evidence. I said, blind faith. I'm like, all right. So they just blew it off. And then recently, the divine himself approached me and said, Christine, I want you to make a video about James Randi. And I'm like, really? What do you want me to talk about? He said, I want you to talk about his life purpose. And I'm like, well, what's that? And he said he was actually supposed to be doing the exact opposite than he did. I'm like, what do you mean? He said he's a psychic himself. James Randi is a psychic. He was supposed to use his whole magician, showmanship, performy, personality, flashiness to prove psychic abilities and make it fun. Said he was actually supposed to work for the light. Instead, he worked for the dark. And I was like, no way. I'm like, that dude is a psychic himself and he's just not telling people? I'm like, there's no way that's true. And then he showed me an image of the Wikipedia logo. So I went on Wikipedia and I scrolled down and there's a section on here called Magician. And it says, Randi's been accused of actually using psychic powers to perform acts such as spoon bending. According to James Alcock, in a meeting where Randi was duplicating the performances of Uri Geller, a professor from the University at Buffalo shouted out that Randi was a fraud. Randi said, yes, indeed, I'm a trickster, I'm a cheat, I'm a charlatan, that's what I do for a living. Everything I've done here was by trickery. The professor shouted back, that's not what I mean. You're a fraud because you're pretending to do these things through trickery, but you're actually using psychic powers and misleading us by not admitting it. A similar event involved Senator Claiborne Pell, a believer in psychic phenomena. When Randi personally demonstrated to Pell that he could reveal, by simple trickery, a concealed drawing that had been secretly made by the senator, Pell refused to believe that it was a trick, saying, I think Randi may be a psychic and doesn't realize it. Randi has consistently denied having any paranormal powers or abilities. And so after I read that, the divine said, see, it's true. Those people are correct. James Randi is a psychic himself. That's his heart-focused work. That's his life purpose. And he's actually supposed to be part of my industry. That is what he was supposed to do with his life. So I didn't stop there. I immediately texted one of my medium friends who I trust, and I said, dude, I need a favor. I need you to do a life purpose read on this dude. Didn't give him any more information than that. Just said, I need you to do a life purpose read on him. Got the exact same thing. Said, well, first of all, his angels are crying for him because he's off path. Like, yeah, that makes sense. Compassionate crying from the angels because you're speaking for the dark. What else you got? And he's like, well, I'm getting that he has psychic abilities himself, but he decided to do the total opposite. Like he was supposed to be more like showmanship psychic abilities, like the fun side of psychic abilities and proving them. And he said instead he decided to devote his life to disproving them. I'm like, okay, that's exactly what I got. Thank you. So yeah, my intuitive friend got the exact same thing. So if you are an intuitive watching this video, I encourage you to do a life purpose read on James Randi. This is public knowledge because we're all connected via the collective consciousness. So I'm technically not telling you anything you don't already know. So do a read on him yourself. Pay close attention. Do a read on his heart energy center and see what you get, because truth is truth, man. It's just there floating around in the air like radio waves, so anyone can pick up on this. Another thing I'd like you guys to do if you're an intuitive watching this video and you're sensitive to energy is Google. Watch videos of him online and pay close attention to how your gut feels. Because it's not going to feel good. This guy speaks for the dark and he's aligned with falsities, so your gut's going to get really tight when you listen to him talk. But that's good for you to experience, because I want you guys to experience doing a read on someone who's speaking for the dark, because they will feel different from other people. So what happened? What happened? Why the 180? Why didn't James Randi actually pursue his life purpose? Ego. He experienced a rejection of self, where he did not trust his psychic abilities. He did not believe in them. He rejected them and stuffed them down. And his ego took over. He didn't want to look like a fool. So he does the exact opposite of what Albert Einstein did. Albert Einstein valued the intuitive mind over the rational, logical mind. James Randi does the exact opposite. He values the rational, logical mind over the intuitive mind. And unfortunately, his logical mind has failed him badly. So because of that, a lot of James Randi's self-esteem comes from his intelligence. And so he didn't want to look like a fool talking about things you can't see. So he focused on scientific evidence, critical thinking. He went the safer route. There's no risk in scientific evidence and critical thinking. Where's the risk there? There's no challenge there. There's no risk of being viewed as a fool. You're not vulnerable if you pursue that path. There's no vulnerability involved there. It's very vulnerable to pursue my industry, because you're talking about things you can't see all day. So it's a very vulnerable place to be. So in that critical thinking, he put himself on a pedestal above the intuitives and mediums, and kind of like the schoolyard bully, where it's like he puffed out his chest and he's like, I'll save you guys, I'll debunk these charlatans, when really you're just coming from a place of ego and being a bully. Just fed your ego, didn't really rescue anybody, because you're speaking for the dark and aligning them with falsities. So the critical thinking got him into trouble because he didn't follow his intuition. He's disconnected from himself. Meditation and journaling could help him get back in touch with himself and who he is, because he's disconnected from that. One of the things that I was pretty freaked out about is that it was literally like a checklist. When I did research about him online, it was like a check, just like boom, boom, boom. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy isn't speaking for the dark a little bit. This guy's speaking for the dark a lot. I, Christine Pavlina, was pulled out of my old life as a marketing executive and taught by the other side about psychic abilities, mediumship, healing capabilities, natural remedies for things, for healing, the importance of not ingesting toxins like sugar and alcohol, and obviously no smoking or drugs. I was told that God exists. I was taught about the importance of blind faith. If you go online and do your research about James Randi, he speaks about every single one of those subjects. And I was like, oh my gosh, you are so aligned with the dark. It's like, jeez. He speaks against psychic abilities, against mediumship, against healing, against natural paths, against, he promotes ingesting toxins. He talks about social Darwinism, where he hopes smokers smoke themselves to death, and he hopes drug users take too many drugs and kill themselves. It was a horrible thing to say. And it's like, okay, you're promoting toxins. That makes sense. It's like you're totally speaking for the dark there, because we're not supposed to ingest toxins. Our body is a temple. He's outspoken about atheism. God really does exist. And he's talking about reasonable faith, reasoned faith based on scientific evidence. Blind faith is rewarded. So it's crazy. I'm like, you are it's like intuitively, he's right on the money. It's like intuitively, this guy just, how can I really stick it to the light? Okay. So the divine is all about teach, 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 and he's decided to make an example out of James Randi. Unfortunately, he has free will, but free will has consequences. So because his free will has put him here, he is an energetic match for the dark. Thoughts are energy, emotions are energy, and the signal that you're broadcasting triggers the law of attraction and universal energy. So what James is attracting to his soul is darkness, because he's speaking for the dark. So the divine still loves him, obviously, because he loves all of his children, but the problem is that light and dark are constantly battling each other. They're at odds with one another. So you can't speak for the dark and not go up against the divine. The divine's going to go up against you. You actually become his enemy when you speak for the dark. So unfortunately, that's where James Randi's free will has placed him. They're in opposition to one another. So the divine is making an example out of Mr. Randi and saying, watch what happens to him, because he's an energetic match for the dark. So I'm going to use him as an example of what not to do. He's going to show you that he's aligned with falsities. Unfortunately, his belief system is also aligned with demons. So when he passes, that's what he's going to attract to himself, is the dark and demons, because his belief system has made him an energetic match for that. Demons don't acknowledge the divine either. Unfortunately, for all the people that he has guided away from developing their own intuition, from seeking out professional intuitives that could have helped him, there are karmic ramifications for that. So now he has to take on the karma of all the people that he negatively affected by being an outspoken atheist, because he's aligning other people with falsities. So they're saying it all begins and ends with his ego. His ego is not going to be preserved. Essentially, Mr. Randi, you were playing with fire. You're betting your karma on the fact that you were correct. And unfortunately, you weren't correct. The divine is saying that he's very, very protective of his light workers. So he's not particularly thrilled with you bad-mouthing Teresa Caputo, John Edward, James Van Praagh, etc. They're all legitimate light workers. So you going up against them, the divine is not happy about. The divine is actually saying, I'm sorry that you chose to go after them, because you were making a mistake. And the divine is basically like giving you compassion and saying, I'm sorry your free will led you here. I'm sorry you chose this. I'm sorry you chose to pursue this path and to be outspoken about it. I really am. Social activism is really what has attracted this darkness to you. The divine is saying that you have to learn lessons and you have to get in touch with yourself and your own truth. Now, another thing is the divine is saying that he is fully capable of financially providing for his light workers. He's saying, thank you for offering my light workers $1 million, but I am fully capable of financially providing for them myself. And I just wanted to play this excerpt from YouTube in an interview with you about your $1 million challenge and about the $1 million you put down. Because it's totally obvious that you're coming from a place of ego.
It doesn't work. Or they can smugly say, oh, God doesn't need to be examined. This man's only a magician. Yeah, but I'm a magician with $1 million that I'll give to you instantly in negotiable bonds, deposited with Goldman Sachs in a special account in New York City. I think that gives me a different stature.
Ego. At least he puts his money where his mouth is. So, the divine is using me as an example and juxtaposing me against James Randi and saying, well, James Randi spoke for the dark and values the logical mind over the intuitive mind and believes in reasoned faith. Christine Pavlina is the exact opposite. She set her ego aside, speaks for the light, took several leaps of blind faith that many would consider logically foolish. And she has essentially aligned herself with truth and the light, and I do believe in blind faith. So he's juxtaposing us against one another and asking everyone to watch us. He says, I want you to watch James Randi as someone who has aligned themselves with falsities in the dark and watch what happens to him. I want you to watch Christine Pavlina as someone who has aligned herself with the truth and the light and watch what happens to her. And he's saying, he's stressing the financially providing for me, meaning he's about to bring a bunch of money onto my path, and he's saying that he will be directly responsible for doing that. He's saying this is happening for a reason, folks. I, the divine, am behind it. I am rewarding Christine for everything she's done. Like, still making an example out of me, saying this is what happens when you align yourself with the light. The critical thinking part is what concerns me, because Mr. Randy's belief system is the lazy man's approach to a belief system. Prove it, give me evidence, lay it out in front of me, and then, I'll believe. It's lazy. Your soul's not being challenged. You're not growing or evolving in any way. It's easy. It's lazy. You don't have to do anything. It's absolutely zero risk involved. No leap of faith involved at all whatsoever. That's why. That's why it's not rewarded. That's why the divine doesn't acknowledge that. Scientific evidence in order to believe something. No, blind faith is rewarded. So the divine is making it very, very clear that I am being rewarded for my acts of blind faith in particular. So I'm really sorry, Mr. Randy. I guess things aren't looking for you. Looking good for you, dude. And I don't know, from one psychic to another, I'm really sorry. But truth is truth. It's an absolute. Just is. There's no gray area. It's black and white. And light and dark are constantly fighting each other. And to everyone else watching, in the meantime, take care and be well. Thank you.